The Spitfire Mark V was developed to address the shortcomings of the earlier Mark I and II variants. Being the next mass-produced version of the aircraft, it featured a number of improvements. One of these being the use of the universal C-type wing, which allowed the aircraft to have the option of installing more cannons in lieu of machine guns if the mission profile dictated it. Hello everyone, Matt from Model Minutes here, and welcome back to the workbench. Today I'm building the brand new Airfix Supermarine Spitfire Mark V in 1/72nd scale. This is the starter set version, which has been tooled specially to help beginners get into scale modelling. So join me as I build and review this new product and see if it's as good as it's supposed to be. For a more detailed look at the sprues, instructions and other contents of the box, take a look at the standalone unboxing video I previously made on that topic. This time I'll be showing you how I built the kit and reviewing the product at the end. I'll pop a list of products used during this build on the screen now to give you an idea of some extra bits and pieces you might want to get. One quick reminder though, even though this is a starter set, Airfix still recommends this kit to those aged 8 years and older. It is worth mentioning that this kit does come with a small selection of paints, so it is my intention to use them during the build. I thought it would be a good idea to build this a bit like a beginner to see if it really holds up to that idea. So, no airbrushing allowed in this video. So, the first thing I do is snip away the fuselage parts from the sprues. I use my cutters to remove the plastic parts and then sand down the rough areas of plastic using a sanding stick. I thought I would paint the interior cockpit area, so to do this I'm going to mix the Humbrol 30 dark green, which comes in the kit, with some 24 matte yellow, which I had from earlier projects. I'm also using Tamiya X20A acrylic thinner to thin down my paints to get a better finish. The yellow and green were mixed together in almost equal parts to get a more appropriate cockpit colour. A few drops of thinner were added to make them really mix together and flow better. A thin layer of paint will self-level as it dries and avoid leaving visible brush marks. I painted a couple of thin layers on the internal areas, including the pilot's chair. Tamiya Extra Thin Cement is a great plastic glue, and I much prefer it to the Humbrol tube glue for joining parts. I press the fuselage halves together, then run the glue along the seam. It runs into the joint under capillary action and helps bond them together. It's considerably easier to use than that thick stuff included in the kit. I will use some of the included glue at times though for parts I'm not too worried about. Here I'm joining the two parts which make up the retaining component for the propeller. After realising I stuck it the wrong way round, I fixed my error by pushing them together correctly. But here is the first problem with the kit. They don't fit together properly. They should push together closer, but that's as far as I can get them to go. It's like the hole in the back part is too narrow, or it just doesn't go as far as it should. Sadly, it was proper stuck now, and I couldn't get it to even come apart again, so I chose to cut them away from each other. I then sanded the plug smooth and used a pin vise to drill my own hole for the remaining length of rod to fit into. When that was done, it was glued into place. Not really sure if this is a common fault, but if it is, it's something that could really throw a beginner off. I popped the now correctly assembled part into its place and glued the engine cowling onto the nose of the model. I was careful not to get glue on the propeller mount so that it could still rotate freely. The pilot's chair can now be glued into place on the bottom wing. This is pretty much the only cockpit detail. The two upper wing halves are glued onto the lower wing. The horizontal tail surfaces are then added into their respective holes in the tail. The radiator on the lower side is added into its grooves. This is followed by the smaller air intake on the other wing, then finally the one on the centre line of the model. I glued the landing gear legs in the lowered position before I remembered that this kit comes with a display stand. A good opportunity to build this plane in a flying pose, so I carefully removed them before the glue had dried. I'll add the raised landing gear later on. Speaking of the display stand, it comes in two parts. The arm was simply glued into its slot on the base. It seems to work quite well. The instructions tell you to paint the entire pilot in the included green paint, but with black boots. I have a good selection of paints, so I think I can do a bit better than that. First up, Tamiya XF15 Flat Flesh was painted onto his face. I'm using a finer brush now as the one included in the kit is much too large to do this accurately. Next up, Vallejo Olive Brown was painted onto his jacket, flying helmet and boots. I mixed some Humbrol 25 blue with a little of the black that was included in the kit to make it a bit darker. This was used on his trousers. Vallejo US Field Drab was carefully applied to his gloves and the harnesses that run over his body to the parachute. The Humbrol Yellow from earlier makes a reappearance and was used on his life jacket. A tiny amount of Vallejo aluminium was added to the buckle on the harness. Vallejo Umber Wash was then brushed onto the entire figure to bring out those recessed details and dull down the finish a little. And with that now dry, I think he's ready to go. It was simply glued into his chair inside the cockpit. The clear cockpit canopy was then carefully masked with some tape. My normal process is to stick on a strip of tape and then flatten it down with a cocktail stick to find the frames. I then cut the edge of the tape at the frames using a sharp knife to remove the excess tape. I would do this to the entire canopy so that the glass parts are protected from any future layers of paint. I used Humbrol Clear Fix to glue the canopy to the model. This product is specially designed to dry clear and not react with the plastic part, which polycement can do. Polycement, as included in the kit, can fog up the plastic if you aren't careful. With that done, the aerial mast was cemented into its slot on top of the fuselage. And now, we're ready for some paint. Okay, hands up, I'm going to cheat a little in this build. I got this grey spray primer for £1 in a local hardware shop, and I'm going to spray it onto the entire model as the first layer. I chose to do this because the plastic Airfix has used is really smooth, and I was worried that the included acrylic paints wouldn't stick to it. It is a problem I've encountered before, so this time I've come prepared. This base layer of paint should act as a key and give the next layers something to stick to. And when that was done, a bit more cheating. Another spray can I also found for £1, this time a black one, which I'm going to use on the display base. I did this because I'm lazy and just couldn't face painting the whole thing with the included tiny pot of black paint. Now, with the primer dry, it's time to add the paint from the kit. Humbrol 64 Light Grey had dried out a bit in the pot, but no bother, I can save that with some acrylic thinner and a good mix. Eventually, this paint was ready to go, and I carefully brushed it onto the underside of the model as indicated by the instructions. It went on really well, and the grey primer certainly helped. In the end, I only needed 2 thin coats to get a good even layer. Next, the included 106 Ocean Grey. This paint has really dried out. Perhaps I can save this one as well with some thinner and some mixing. Nope. After some considerable time, it's still just a lump. In the bin it goes. Thankfully, I have an alternative on hand. Tamiya XF82 Ocean Grey. This was thinned and then painted onto all the top surfaces of the model. I had to take care to avoid the previously painted light grey underside, so took care where they met. After 2 layers of this paint, I was ready for the next colour. Well, I know the 30 dark green is still liquid because I used it earlier. Again, this was thinned a little, but it was already really runny, so I used a lot less thinner this time. I carefully brushed the green paint onto the model, following the camouflage pattern on the instructions. Again, 2 layers of this paint would be needed to get a good even finish. And when it was dry, the camouflage scheme is now complete. Before I get those decals on the model, a layer of this Humbrol 135 satin varnish was thinned with a little water and brushed onto the entire model. This will give a slightly glossier finish to the model and be a much better surface for the decals. If I pop my decals on a matte or dull surface, I run the risk of the transfer film going all silvery and ruining the look. Speaking of the decals, they are printed by Cartograph and look great. I'm going to use Microset and Sol as my decal solutions in this build. I'll use the blue bottle to get the decals on, then later the red bottle to really soften them into the detail of the model and look painted on. Because, as previously mentioned, I'm a bit lazy, I decided to soak the whole sheet in warm water to allow the transfers to release from the backing paper. You might want to cut the sheet into individual sections to make it easier though. Microset in the blue bottle was brushed onto the model in the right places, and then the correct decal lifted from the sheet and placed onto the model. Some fine adjustment and more Microset might be needed to get the decals in the right places. The ones on the wings are fairly straightforward, but the fuselage ones need a little more care. First you need to apply the band and get it in the right place. This is because the registration code of the aircraft goes partly on top of it. With that done, the identification and roundel can be added. Just pay attention to the instructions so that you get them in the right places. With all the decals in place, some Micro Sol from the red bottle can be brushed on top of them. This will soften them down onto the surface of the model and make them look less like stickers. If the transfers start to wrinkle, don't worry, that's normal. They will eventually settle down flat. Whilst those decals are curing, I'm going to use the included 33 matte black paint. But alas, this paint has also dried out. It's not as bad as some of the others, and I did use a little bit earlier for the pilot, so I know it can be saved. Some thinner brought it back to life, and I used it to paint the blades on the propeller. A few thin coats would be needed. I also used it to paint the tyres on the wheels. Vallejo white paint was next to be used. Looking at the box artwork, this Spitfire has a white spinner on the nose, so that's what I decided to do. After a few layers of this paint, the yellow makes another reappearance and was used to highlight the tips of the propeller blades. I just did this very carefully by hand. Now the decals have cured, and you can see that they have really conformed to the surface of the model. I love the quality of these Cartograph decals. Vallejo matte varnish was thinned with a little water and then brushed over the entire aircraft. This clear varnish will dull down the shiny layer we applied earlier, whilst also protecting the decals and giving a uniform finish and look to the model. I needed 2 layers of this paint to get a uniform coat of this paint. Now I'm going to mix this Vallejo gunmetal with Tamiya X33 bronze acrylic. A drop of thinner will help them really blend together, with the gunmetal making the bronze a little bit darker. This was then carefully painted onto the engine exhaust pipes, taking my time to make sure I didn't get it in the wrong places. With that done, it's time to glue the raised landing gear into place on the bottom of the model. Then the propeller can be added onto the nose. Finally, it's time to carefully peel away the masking tape from the canopy. I used my tweezers to carefully lift the corners and peel it away. On the whole, the masking tape has done a good job, but there were a few little bits of bleed which I carefully removed using a cocktail stick. Oh, I almost forgot. I need to pop the display stand into the hole underneath. And with that, it's finished. There are loads of things that could be done to further improve the look of this kit, from adding washes, chipping, stains, and even an aerial wire. But as mentioned at the beginning of the video, I wanted to build this a bit like a beginner and see what I ended up with. Yes, I know I've used a few extra paints and glues and things, and did a bit of cheating with those spray cans, but on the whole, I don't think I've done anything too difficult to replicate. If you're a beginner watching this, you can pick and choose what you do. If you want to spray paint a base layer, cool. If you want to get some decal solutions, great. If you want to paint it pink with purple spots, go for it. It's your build, do it how you want, with what you have available. And with that in mind, I completely get what Airfix were trying to do here. The design of this kit, coupled with those easy to follow colour instructions and helpful tip sheet, is spot on. This is definitely the direction that a beginner series of kits should go down. Rather than making a normal kit and just throwing some paints in, they have genuinely thought about their target market. But before I sing their praises too much, let's talk about the problems that do exist with this kit. First up, whilst there were no real issues with the fit of the parts, nor was there any flash to be seen, I did find that propeller assembly component to be a problem. I'm not sure if I missed something here or did something wrong, which I shouldn't have, seeing as this is aimed at a complete beginner, but it just didn't fit together properly. I would be interested to know if anyone else has had this issue, but if I were a beginner, I may not have been able to solve this problem. My second issue is that hole in the bottom of the model. Yes, I know that's where the display stand goes, but does it have to be so obvious? If I didn't want to use my display stand, that hole is always going to be there. Perhaps Airfix could have included a small plug part which fits into the hole as an alternative, basically hiding its existence. Another idea I had was to use magnets to hold it onto the display stand, but perhaps installing those is a little complicated for a beginner. I think my only other issue with this kit is the evident lack of quality control at the Humbrol factory. Those included Humbrol paints are absolutely, well, useless. Now, bearing in mind that this kit is brand new and I only bought it 3 months before building it, why were those paints so bad? I'd understand if this was a 10-year-old starter set which had been sitting on a shelf, I'd expect those paints to have dried out. But not from a kit which is supposedly brand new this year. All of that work to design a kit perfect for a beginner, easy to assemble with some great instructions, is completely ruined by the fact that the included paints were virtually unusable. 3 out of the 4 paints in my set were dry. 2 of them could be saved using thinner, but 1 had to be binned because it was completely dead. But should a beginner be expected to know what to do to save their paints? I don't think that's particularly fair on them. Oh, and the 1 paint that wasn't a lump of goo, I'm still not happy with. The green paint seemed a little too thin. Not to mention that if I compare it to another Airfix Spitfire kit, which also came with the same number 30 dark green paint, you'll notice that the one in this kit has a much brighter colour. I'm not sure it's as accurate as it should be. So whatever is going on in the Humbrol factory needs sorting out. For a model kit which costs £10.99 at the time of making this video, this simply isn't good enough. As a beginner, finding 3 out of 4 of my included paints being unusable is going to be a barrier to the completion of this kit. It might even put a negative spin on the first experience I have of this hobby. If paints are promised, paints you should have. But anyways, I think I've said my piece on that now, let's move on. Generally speaking, this is a kit with a lot of positives. I think the reintroduction of display stands on Airfix kits is going to be well received by the community. People have been asking for them for a very long time. I think the concept of this range of kits is spot on too, being easy to build and very accessible to new modelers. I don't really care that this kit is a bit less detail, particularly in the cockpit and a few other areas, as it allows you to progress quickly and get some practice without worrying about getting things perfect. Let's just gloss over the fact though that Airfix have also made this exact same aircraft model again, just with a few more parts for those who do care about detail. Although externally, I expect it will be virtually identical. Subject for another video, I suppose. I built this kit over a period of 2 days, but had I sat down and focused on it, I'm sure I could have started at breakfast time and had it finished by dinner. And as a kid, that's what I wanted, to fill a Saturday or Sunday building a model and not having to wait until the next day to finish it. I mean, who wants to wait a few days to throw it down the stairs or out of a window? And I suppose this leads me on to a question. Does this have play value? As a kid, those kits definitely had play value. I particularly liked the ones with different bombs and rockets and things that you could swap out depending on the mission that day. Perhaps in the future, Airfix will add some products to the beginners range which have some options like that. And with that, I think it's time to wrap this video up. This brand new Airfix Spitfire Mark V kit does, on the whole, meet the target of being beginner friendly with some great aspects of this product. Being one of the first of the range though, it clearly has some teething issues which need working out in future releases. Let me know down in the comments, did you enjoy my build and find it helpful? Are you a beginner and have you also built this kit? I would also be interested to know if anyone else has had issues with that propeller and dried up paints. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like and consider subscribing so that you never miss a modelling upload. Massive thanks to my patrons on Patreon and my channel members here on YouTube for the amazing extra support they give my channel. Take a look at the links in the description to find out more about how you can get involved. Finally, a big thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.